Hi. Well, we reached the end of the long journey through the infancy narratives in Luke's Gospel through chapters 1 and 2. Today, with the last of these sections, Jesus in Jerusalem, staying there after his parents have left when he's about 12 years old. And as I'm sure even casual readers of the New Testament recognize, this is the only story in the entire Bible about Jesus between his babyhood and his adulthood. And Luke's the only one to have it here. Rather than asking the impossible question of whether this is a historical event or not, it's more interesting, I think, to try to look at what is Luke trying to accomplish by telling us this story. To start with, all standard commentaries note that this trope of the later hero who is then, after the fact, recalled to have been a prodigy or have some special power when he was young was a common story in Greco-Roman historical stories, but also in biblical stories, and in biblical stories beyond the Bible, so to speak. For example, in the legendary stories of the beyond the Gospels, there are many stories of Jesus doing special things, including tricking his friends and showing special powers and all the kinds of things you might imagine a godchild might do when he was a teenager. So they had a certain sense of humor about it then. But those are later, 2nd and 3rd century, and part of a different tradition. And Luke obviously didn't know those that were composed after him. Perhaps those were composed on the basis of echoes of what he's doing in this very scene. But certainly stories about Alexander the Great as a child and Socrates as a child were around. And so whether Luke is conforming to the norms of what he understands his audience would expect, or he's simply telling a story that he inherited from his tradition, we don't know. All we know is we have this story, and Luke has placed it in a particular context here, both in the form of a chiasm, as you can see, but also, as we'll look at, as part of this sequence in chapter 2 of responses to the birth, as the event of Jesus' birth is filtered through the Hebrew scriptures via law, prophets, and wisdom. So let's jump right in and we'll see how that goes as we continue. So we noted last time, verse 40, the child grew and became strong, and you can see from the chiasm that that's the A and the A prime parts are almost identical, not quite. We'll see there are slight differences in verse 52. But this is framing this, and it's framing it with two of the summary passages that we looked at last time as well, that Luke throughout the Gospel presents many of these little summary passages. This is the only place where we see two of them in such a short sequence. And it's plainly focusing on the theme of wisdom, as we can see. So we'll see what that means as we look at the details as we go. Here the child, Paidon, and already we have something interesting to look at, which is, we'll go back up to this piece. There are 4 different words used to describe both the young Jesus and the young John here, and I won't go through each one, but one could find some interesting things in tracking how Luke uses this language. And translations are often misleading, because the English word child that you can see there in verse 240 is sometimes translating Paidon, as it is here, but we'll see a little farther down, as you can see on my chart on the right side here in 248, it's teknon. So following the English words is often very misleading. So I've highlighted the Greek words there of brephos for baby or infant, paidon for a young person, and that can cover a range of ages, huios for the male child in particular, and of course that can be a son of any age, not necessarily a child, as in son of God for an emperor, or teknon, which is a generic word for a child. So we'll note how those words form a certain pattern, and yet maybe not a pattern, as we go not only through the infancy stories, finish that today, but as we go through the rest of the gospel. So the paidon here grew, and as we noted last time, this shows Jesus as an ordinary human being growing and becoming strong, and the favor of God is upon him. And we'll pick up in verse 41, which is after we did verse 40 last time. So we hear here another example of the parents' Jewish piety. They were following the law of the Lord, as you can see in the chiasm that we just completed, and there was prophecy amidst that, as we'll go back and look, and now it's about the festival of Passover. This is now, if we count it rightly, Mary's 13th trip to Jerusalem, because we were told earlier that they came to Passover, as you can see in verse 42, they went up as usual for the festival, so suggesting he's gone up every year, and of course they went up several times for the census and for his presentation, and now, so she's been to Jerusalem a lot of times already, and Jesus will of course only get there one other time at the very end, and that will be at the Feast of Passover Passover too. So this scene in 240 to 52 is framing really the very end of the story in the Passion when Jesus returns to Passover. Returns to Jerusalem again for Passover. The word for feast here, horte, is the standard word for feast, but Passover is the only one that's mentioned here. Passover is never called a feast. This phrase is never used in the Septuagint. It's, as Raymond Brown notes in Birth of the Messiah, there's a possible link there with John 13, the beginning of the Last Supper discourse, but we won't go there now. But certainly the term for feast referred to several feasts, and although John's Gospel also uses the Feast of Sukkot or Tabernacles, and Luke will refer to Pentateuch or Shavuot in Acts 2, only Passover is seen here in the Gospel. So, it's the Passover season, and they're going up to Jerusalem, and now we're finding out that he was 12 years old. And many non-scholarly sources like to say he's going up for his bar mitzvah, but by all accounts, the Jewish practice of making a son a child of the commandments, which is literally what bar mitzvah means, was established far later and would have been at 13 years old. The much more recent bat mitzvah for daughters at 12 years old is a very recent innovation. So the bar mitzvah would have been at 13. So that's not what this is. This is simply he's 12 years old. And note, there's no particular reason they're bringing him in the sense that it's not for his presentation, it's not for their purification. They're just pilgrims to the Passover like everybody else. And they've been going every year, so they have no reason, we have no reason as readers, and they have no reason as parents to suspect that this year will be any different. And why it's different, we don't know. Is there something about his being 12 other than it's a nice biblical number? We don't know. But we're told, as you can see here, that according to custom or according to every year, they went for the festival. So it's business as usual, except, of course, it's not as things unfold. So we'll see here that the journey away from Jerusalem and back echoes the Emmaus story at the end. There'll be a number of ways that the beginning of Luke echoes the ending. That's what leads some scholars to think that the infancy stories, chapters 1 and 2, were written after the fact, and that may be, but we're not going to explore those questions of how Luke chose the pieces and what order he put them together here. So when the festival was ended, literally having completed the days of the festival, and they began to return, a common word for return here, and here we have the boy, the pious. So we note back in here it was paidon, translated as child, and here it's the same word translated as boy. So the translation is the problem there, not the Greek. And the word for stayed behind, hupomenon here, from the verb hupomeno, literally to abide under, perhaps ironically echoes Malachi 3:2. Here you can see it. But who can endure the day of his coming, and who can stand when he appears? In other words, this is the day of his coming, and who can do what he's doing, which is to stay or endure or to abide at that same time. And perhaps that's an obscure reference and Luke doesn't have in mind, but there are a number of places we've already seen where Luke's intertextual references to Hebrew Scripture are both subtle and often clever. So you can decide for yourself whether there's an echo there or I'm just imagining it. So he stayed behind in Jerusalem, and his parents did not know it. And we'll hear the parents here are in the business of not knowing and not finding. And it's perhaps surprising because so far they've been so positive. Mary, with Gabriel, of course, said yes to the Holy Spirit filling her with this child without even understanding what was happening. And they've been so pious and obedient, and yet they're seeing something here that was just simply not expected. Perhaps they had been lured into the sense of normalcy after a dozen years of parenting. Of course, we can only imagine and speculate about what it was like to raise the little Jesus from infancy to 12 years old. But in any event, they didn't know that he was staying behind, and you can only imagine the shock of parents to discover that he was missing. We note in terms of drama, this is really the first scene in Luke where there's tension like this. There's been drama a little bit so far in Zechariah being struck dumb, and there's been amazement in the lights in the sky from the heavenly host and the glory of God, but there hasn't been inter-character tension in the same kind of way, and we'll see plenty of it in Luke's gospel. So the first piece of tension is perhaps ironically between Jesus and his parents. Assuming here 9 times in Luke in action you can see, and we have the modern play on words about what happens when you assume, and it happens to them too. Maybe it doesn't happen to Jesus, but it certainly happens to them a little bit. In the group of travelers, in the synod, literally, synodia here, a caravan or group of travelers. So they travel together for safety and for support, of course, for food or shelter or protection from bandits and strangers on the road to Jerusalem. Luke takes takes advantage of the expectation of fear, of course, as we know in the so-called Good Samaritan story in chapter 10, when someone alone on the road down from Jericho to Jerusalem is hit upon by bandits. So here they're traveling in safety, and they went a day's hodon here, away. Journey is fine, except hodon is such a special Luke word, and it echoes here in particular what we just saw in 179. I'll just go back to that for a second. To guide our feet on the way of peace. And so, as we see here, a day's hodon, and in Acts, the apostles, Luke will call the discipleship of Jesus the way, capital W in most translations, following the way. And of course, that's also a play in Exodus, because Exodus is from the Greek ex hodos, the way out of captivity. And we've already seen that that's a theme here, not only in the Exodus imagery we've seen explicitly, but in the sense of seeking the redemption or the liberation of Israel as they did when they were in Egypt. So a day's hodon. And they began to look for him, but they did not find him. And that leads us to look at the seeking and finding theme throughout Luke. And we can start down here where we are in the not finding. And we see that in 2:45. And then there's a couple of other not findings, including Jesus' risen body there at the very end. But throughout the main part of the gospel, we see many opportunities for searching, both in parabolic speech here or in teaching speech. Seek and you will find, as we see in chapter 11, or evil spirits or unclean spirits seeking a resting place or seeking fruit on a tree, or in the parables we see in 15 about the woman seeking the lost coin and the man seeking the lost sheep, and of course the father seeking the lost son there. So the theme of seeking and finding is a very common one in Luke's gospel, and here it starts with the parents seeking and not finding Jesus. And they're looking, not relatives and friends is a misleading translation here. Sungenes certainly suggests relatives. That's echoing what Elizabeth was, often referred to as Mary's cousin, but simply a member of her wider extended family. But friends is misleading here, literally those who were known. So a friend, philos in Greek, implies a particular kind of relationship where it's just simply they're looking among the people they know, amongst the travelers, to see if anybody has heard word about their lost 12-year-old son. And they didn't find him. They returned to Jerusalem. So they were a day away already before they found him, which is a startling thing when you think about it, not realizing he was missing for a complete day. Perhaps they're tired, perhaps they're busy, but as far as we can tell, he's their only child. And although there are other people who will be described as Jesus' brothers and sisters, there certainly aren't any other noted here. So whether he literally had other brothers and sisters or not, he's presented as an only child in this scene. So it's not like they had a whole bunch of kids to keep track of, and they only were missing one of them. He's their only one, and they can't find him. And now it takes 3 more days to find him. It's not clear if that's 3 days total or 4 days total, but either way, can you imagine missing your child in the crowdedness of the temple and of all these pilgrims coming and going on the narrow roads with all the animals and the terror they would have felt? And as many commentators have said, the sword that Simeon said would pierce the heart of Mary, literally a pasuke, her life, is already taking place here. The missing Jesus certainly would be a sword at the core of his mother here. So after 3 days, they found him sitting among the teachers, literally sitting among them, which is not at their feet. Not as Mary is, sister of Martha in chapter 10, where Jesus tells Martha that Mary has chosen the better part to sit at the feet of the teacher Jesus as a disciple. But Jesus is not sitting at the feet of the Jerusalem temple teachers as a disciple. He's sitting there as a peer, listening to them and literally and questioning them, not asking them questions as such. It's the verb parautao there. And it's used 17 times in Luke. I just want to highlight that, especially for those who might be listening who were raised in evangelical traditions or in perhaps narrow-minded other traditions where you were told to just obey and not ask questions. It's so essential to ask questions, and Jesus learns by asking questions. So let's please put aside the idea that somehow questioning God or questioning the Bible or questioning tradition or questioning anybody is anything but holy work when we're seeking to gain wisdom, as plainly Jesus is said to do here, since he's growing in wisdom through this process of listening, questioning, and discussing, presumably the scripture text with the teachers, which is what they would be teachers of here. And all who heard him were amazed. And we hear a different word for amazed, existanto. Literally, they stood out. Out of being, exist here is what we think of as being, but literally it means to stand out. And that reminds us of this language of amazement chart that we looked at a couple sessions ago. And you can see different words translated the same way. So you can see where we are in 247, existeme, the verb, but in 233 we hear we're amazed, but it's a different word, thaumazo. And I'm not going to worry you about the differences between these different Greek words. They all, whether it's astounded, amazed, or various forms of that in translation or in the Greek, expressing the sense that so much of what Jesus does leads people to be confused, to be surprised, to not understand what's going on. And what they need, of course, is wisdom, as we'll see. So what they're amazed at is his understanding, sunesis, and his answers, apokrisis here. So let's look at sunesis, which goes along with what we'll see in a few minutes as their lack of understanding. And what that's pointing us to here is the pattern that I was suggesting earlier in here that we're seeing. So we looked at in the earlier chiasm how it was framed by according to the law. So from 222 to 39 was framed by the law. You can see that again on this chiasm, law of the Lord and law of the Lord. But in this scene we have here, we see that law, literally, law of Moses was named there, and then various aspects of the law of Moses from Leviticus are referred to in that section. There isn't a separate section on prophets, but since Anna is explicitly called a prophet in this section, we could suggest here was the law, the Torah, and here's the prophets. And we see how many times Isaiah is cited in this section. And I'm not just selectively picking the ones that match this premise. These are the passages that are cited in each section. I've not excluded any that I'm aware of or that I've gotten from other scholars. And then so in this section we're on now, framed explicitly by wisdom, like this section was framed explicitly by law, we hear these words that are wisdom words, sunesis and sunikon here, which are words out of the wisdom tradition, which is to say they're not only words about wisdom, which is to say to have understanding, but they're Greek words that are used in the last section of the Hebrew Bible that we call the wisdom literature, or ketuvim in Hebrew. The birth of Jesus is being filtered through from babyhood to his 12 years age through all the aspects of the Hebrew scripture tradition. So there they were, amazed at him sitting and questioning and understanding and responding to the teachers. And so here we get to the parents' language. And as Green notes, and you can see in my notes here, Luke repeatedly refers to Jesus' parents. Mary refers to Jesus as child and speaks of Jesus' father. And Jesus counters by naming the God of the temple as his father. So there are various aspects of what fatherhood and parenthood and family are here. And we'll see that played out much later when the question of Jesus' mother and family are waiting outside the door. And he asks the rhetorical question, who are my mother and my brothers and my sisters? And we'll see that much later. So the parents now join with everyone else who was amazed by being astonished. And again, we saw that in our chart just now. But only the mother speaks, his mother, not named as Mary, and the father, again, Joseph has nothing to say throughout the entire thing. And now the third name for him, the third way of addressing him, teknon here. And we'll see the address as teknon a couple of times. And it's important because here it comes out in terms of the negative of why have you treated us this way. And we'll see it comes out in 1531 about the father whose prodigal son had gone away, talking to the elder son and trying to encourage him in. And then we'll see in 1625 about Abraham referring to the rich man who excludes Lazarus as teknon here. So a term of endearment, but often a term of endearment in the midst of an accusation. And here this phrase, why have you treated us like this, or literally, why have you made us like this, is a clear biblical formulation. I won't show you all those passages from Genesis there, Numbers, or Judges, but you can see it's almost the identical phrase there. So this rhetorical but also real question, why have you done this thing to us? And in addition to asking the question, they name exactly what it is. Edu here, the great behold word. Your father and I, you notice this is the second time that the father is being marginalized. Both she's the only one who speaks, and she now speaks directly for him. emphasizing the searching, as we saw, and anxiety is not a good word here at all. Utomenoi here as being pained and sorrowful. Note that it's translated wildly differently in these different places. Let's look at that for a moment. In 1624, this is again that same rich man who's experiencing agony in these flames. Hardly is that the same as anxiety. And in Acts 20 here, it's described as grieving. So there's a different word for anxiety, as we'll see, especially in the Mary and Martha story and other places. So here it's a word for pain. We've been searching for you in great pain and torment. It would be obviously more than anxiety if you thought your child was lost for 3 days. What greater pain could a mother have than to fear that her child was dead? So that sword is clearly piercing to the core of Mary already. But Jesus responds not with empathy or compassion for his mother's situation, but with straightforward truth. And these are his first words. Why were you seeking for me? And of course, there's a great irony there because, of course, we're supposed to be seeking for Jesus. And in John's gospel, that's exactly also the question of, what are you seeking when two disciples of John leave to follow the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. But here it's certainly a negative question, like you shouldn't be seeking for me. And again, the word is emphasized here. Did you not know? And of course, they didn't know where he was, and now he doesn't know that I must be, and here's the translation issue here. So, in my Father's house is en tois to patros, literally, in my Father's things, or in the essence, in the stuff of my Father. So that's why some translations say about my Father's business. This one in New Revised Standard has in my Father's house. But really, it's not about the temple as such. It must be about the things of my Father, which is to say God's things. He must be focused on God. And of course, we can hear the play on Father here, a theme very important in John's Gospel, where Father plays out against the emperor as father, but here it plays out against Joseph as father. And this is the first use of Father for God of 21 times in Luke's Gospel. And so we saw already, he asked the rhetorical question that obviously has the negative answer, did you not know? But now the narrator emphasizes they did not understand, and the word sunaken again here is another one of those wisdom words, and it put them in a good boat, so to speak, with others who did not understand. Let's look at those quickly. In 8:10, we see it's outsiders. So to you, the disciples has been given to know the secrets, but those outside would not know. But the wonderful irony of that is in 1834, it's precisely the disciples who understood nothing about all these things. So although he said it was given to them to know, 10 chapters later they still don't know. And it's finally reversed in the final verses of the gospel when he opened their minds to understand the scriptures on the road to Emmaus. So we'll see this long journey from 250 to 2445 of coming to understand, to gain the wisdom of what Jesus was about. And so he went down with them and came to Nazareth, which is to say to reverse the entire journey, the first of 13 coming downs. A lot of those coming downs are coming down from heaven. We'll see those as we go. And was obedient to them, which is to say, echoing a scene from Proverbs 3 about how a son is supposed to be obedient to his father, as you can see here, seeking wisdom. And of course, Proverbs is precisely wisdom literature. So his mother didn't treasure all these things, as delightful as that term is. As we see from the commentary down below, the New Revised Standards treasured all these things as romantic and palliative. The Greek dietario simply means to store or maintain. She continues to ponder. Treasure is the wrong term for the message of a sword and of tragedy. So she's clearly pondering things. She's certainly not treasuring the fact that she doesn't understand that Jesus has left them, although he comes back with them. That's hardly something to treasure. It's something to ponder and to consider. So she's not resisting it. She's not rejecting it. She's not opposing it. She's just holding on to it to see what happens. And our scene comes to a close with the second of the summaries that closes the chiasm. Jesus increased in wisdom. So he grows in this as he grows in stature. And in years, although this is ambiguous, we'll see it again with Zacchaeus. It can mean either stature of height. We were told, to be told that Zacchaeus was small of Helikia, which could mean that of height or of stature, like social status. Here it's translated as years, and divine and added to human favor. And the human favor sounds so nice, and we'll see that echoed in Acts of the Apostles when the discipleship community gained human favor, but it will not last long in Luke. By chapter 4, the people who favored Jesus will quickly turn and try to throw him off the cliff. So that completes chapter 2 and the birth of Jesus, and now the gospel narrative itself will begin in the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, John the Baptist in the wilderness. We'll see where that goes next time. See you then.